Now, for more on this story, I'm joined by Commodore Chitrapu Uday Bhaskar, who's the Director of Society for Policy Studies in New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us. First and foremost, we saw Modi riding with Putin in his armoured limousine and calling Russia India's shoulder-to-shoulder partner. How significant is this symbolism at a time of very deep global tension?
I would describe the symbolism of Prime Minister Modi being in the same car as President Putin as very significant. And very significant because of the current global geopolitical context, and particularly the manner in which the United States and President Donald Trump have sought to intimidate India with the trade tariffs. So this symbolism, in my view, works at two levels. One is India, I think, is sending a strong signal to the world and President Trump that the relationship with Russia is an important one and India remains committed to it. And second, for President Putin, if I may add, at a time when the United States and its allies have sought to ostracize him, and they have used some very strong language against him because of the war in Ukraine, he is now back in global focus, particularly in China at the summit that President Xi is hosting. So I think this is significant symbolism, both for President Putin and for Prime Minister Modi.
Commodore Bhaskar, India and China remain among the biggest buyers of Russian crude oil. That's despite the US tariffs that we've seen in the last weeks and months. How central is this energy relationship to India's foreign policy right now?
The energy determinant or the energy issue is very central to India's foreign policy now, because this is the trigger that President Donald Trump has used to impose tariffs on India, which India has said are unjustified for a variety of reasons. Because number one, India is not the largest importer of oil from Russia. Paradoxically, it's China. But I think the foreign policy principle for India is that it will act in a manner that its own national interest impels it to do so. In this case, to buy oil from a source that is viable in terms of the price and which is strategically the most optimum option, in this case, Russian. So for India, energy is a very important aspect both of its foreign policy and the principles that it has always espoused for years on end, that it will not be intimidated when its national interest is at stake. The second point, if I may add, this particular energy policy of India has also contributed to the larger global good, meaning that if India had not imported oil from Russia, which, by the way, the Biden administration had encouraged India to buy oil from Russia so that the global oil price would stabilize. There is a very important report which has indicated that because India was buying oil from Russia, the price was around $65 per barrel. If India had not bought this oil, the global oil price would have gone upwards of $95, and that would have led to a very serious economic and financial crisis for the whole world. So in that sense, I think the energy issue is very significant for India and for the world.
It's a very fine balancing act that we're seeing here, Commodore Bhaskar. With Modi meeting both Putin and Xi on the sidelines of the SCO, how is India managing this very delicate balancing act? You have to maintain close ties with Moscow, you have to also engage with Washington and, of course, with the West. How has that all been managed?
Historically, India has always opted to maintain this fine balance. If you go back to the Cold War, when we had the United States and the former Soviet Union, India chose to remain non-aligned. Yet it maintained very close relations both with Moscow and Washington. This was during the Cold War. After the end of the Cold War, India was able to improve its relationship with Washington in 2008, once the nuclear issue was resolved. But still, it was able to maintain the relationship with Moscow, particularly for the military inventory. And this was something that Washington was able to accommodate. And I think this has been a characteristic of India, that it has been able to forge strong partnerships, but it did not want to become a military ally or a camp follower. And I think that has been one of India's traits, both politically and diplomatically. But I must add that it's being severely tested now because of the kind of policies that President Donald Trump is now pursuing. And much of it, if I may say so, based on what American political commentators have said, it seems to be a kind of personal pique that India did not accept his formulation about ending the war with Pakistan, and therefore making him a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. So I think this is a very, very unprecedented, unexpected turbulence in the India-US relationship, but hopefully both sides will be able to find a modus vivendi.
As you mentioned, not necessarily a military ally, but Narendra Modi has publicly supported a peaceful settlement in Ukraine. Do you think this statement at this summit specifically marks a stronger positioning by India on the war, or is it more about optics?
No, I'd say that the Indian position on the war in Ukraine has been consistent. Because if you recall, Prime Minister Modi, the first public statement that he had made about Ukraine was when he told Russia, President Putin, that this is not a time for war. This was at a previous summit. And from then to now, I think this is one of India's USPs, that it is able to maintain a relationship and a communication link, both with Moscow and with Kiev. So I think Prime Minister Modi's articulation of this is a signal at the SCO summit to the world, to Russia, to China, and I think to the United States and the allies, that India remains a voice for a peaceful resolution of the war in Ukraine. So that is part of the balancing, delicate act that you had referred to.
Commodore Bhaskar, thank you so much for joining us on W News.